Radio Infinity proudly presents. Welcome to Side 1. Radio Infinity speaks. The one is brought to you by music. Without it, would I have a YouTube channel? I'd like to say hello to everyone. Hope you're safe and healthy. Flashback recap. Who's who of the Swinging Sixties? Just a few words. I'd like to talk about this album first that we played last Saturday night, and thank you for coming out to listen to that. It was great to hear stuff from the 50s and early 60s. There was some vocals in there was some singing, but most of it was just laid back, swinging jazz music, cool instrumentals that made you just want to sit back in your chair and recline and just relax, because it felt pretty good just to do that, especially after a long week. But it also had great artists on there: Dave Brubeck, Miles Davis. Let's see, who else was on there? Uh, Jerry Mulligan was on there as well, and the female black artist that sang along with Dave Brubeck was starts with a C. Let's see. She was pretty popular back then because she had her own, of course, her own albums, but she also collaborated, collaborated with other artists, other jazz musicians, jazz groups and bands. What's it called? So yeah, she was definitely really big, and her name is, or I'm not sure if it's is or was, she may have passed away by now, but Carmen McRae. I mean, her voice, I can hear it, and then I can put her face to it, because on the albums that I have of some of the jazz albums that I have, where she collaborates with some of the jazz musicians, I see her face, so I can definitely put her name. I can put her voice to her face, and sometimes when it comes to music, it's kind of hard to do that. But her sound, her voice is recognizable, and because it's so great, and it was great. So that was a pretty fun album, because I have a lot of the solo artists albums already, but hearing that in compilation form, like Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong, I forgot to mention him as well. Louis Armstrong with the Dave Brubeck trio, and this was back in the early 50s or mid 50s when that happened. So, like I said, just a recap, flashback recap. That was a great compilation album to listen to, because I do appreciate music from 70 years ago. Wow, I gotta thank Earth, Wind, and Fire for that intro. Reasons is the Q&A part section of this little shindig. And first question is, do you like jazz? And which artist or artists do you like? To answer that question, yes, I do like jazz. I liked it since I was young, and I think I've mentioned that in the past, but it definitely played a big influence on my love of music, and listening to the early sounds and the evolution of music from, wow, back from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, hearing that evolution. It all started, with a jazz sound. It didn't matter what color, what race you were doing some type of jazz, whether it was um, a cool jazz, a warm jazz, a slap jazz. Um, that was the type of music that was popular in the day. So that's what everyone was doing. And listening to the different types, it definitely introduces you to a wider spectrum of music. And what artists do I like? I do like a lot of artists. Uh, you know, if we go from like white to black to Latino, my favorite artists were Dave Brubeck and his quartet. And I have most of his LPs, including some of the ones from the 50s or early 50s, mid 50s, where they were pressed on color vinyl, which is pretty cool. It was like purple, red, green, blue, all kinds of pretty color vinyl. I guess black, of course, would be black musicians would be Miles Davis, John Coltrane, uh, Wes Montgomery, some of the Latin jazz, and this came a little bit later on, like in the '60s and '70s, where the Latin jazz picked up. But it definitely started with let me see let me see what his name was again. I have the music here, but I draw blank sometimes. His name was uh, Tito Puente, of course, Tito Puente, and he pretty much started. I wouldn't say started, but he was very influential in the Latin jazz arena, and his influence led to others in the Latin jazz. Um, another Latin jazz artist that I liked was his name is Gato Barbieri, and kind of has like a cool '70s feel to it. He played the saxophone. Tito Puente was on the percussion and the percussion instruments, but they too kind of have that Latin feel to it. A quick pace. You can tap your foot to. You can snap your fingers to. Kind of that quick pace. So those were the ones that I liked growing up. Next question: did you ever play an instrument growing up? Yes. I was sort of pushed and forced to play the piano, and I played that for a while, for maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. I got somewhat far. Then, for some idiotic reason, I quit. And of course, being an adult, looking back on it, it's like, well, that was stupid. You could have been a professional. I wouldn't say professional, but I would say like a language. If you learn a language, you can be proficient in it. And I just gave that up for some reason. Then also in high school, in the band for a year or two before I gave that up, I played the cornet, which is very comparable to the trumpet, and that was pretty fun too. But being a kid in junior high and high school, there really wasn't that focus, that determination that's needed if you're gonna stick with an instrument. I played mostly athletics, so I didn't give it the time and the dedication it deserved. So I guess those were two things that I regret not, learning more of back in the day. Next question: do you think liking jazz led to you liking other music? And I would say yes. That played a major part in my evolution of liking other music. You can throughout the decades you can hear jazz, and you can hear instruments from the jazz era: trumpets, saxophones, um, bass, and then it went from the bass to like a bass guitar, pianos evolve into the music from the late '60s, from the '70s, from organs to keyboards to uh, different types of percussion. It all evolved into music that I liked. For example, Dave Brubeck had different instruments in his band. So did Miles. So did John. Um, Tito and Gato, and that led to me liking Chicago with their uh, different amount of instruments. I don't know how many instruments there are in that band. 7, 8, 9, 10 now. And Earth, Wind, and Fire is another one because they have so many instruments in their band, along with their singers, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Um, there can be other examples as well, but those were the big ones that really influenced my love of music and listening to listening to other music that evolved from jazz. What jazz songs do you happen to have digital copies of? Well, I do have the Tito Puente's version of Take Five, which Take Five is originally from the Dave Brubeck Quartet and his album Time Out, which was originally written by his saxophonist in the band. And his name is, let me see, Dave Brubeck Quartet. I know I'm gonna smack myself later on for not knowing, but his name is Paul Desmond, and Paul Desmond was a major saxophonist in the day. Um, so I have the Tito Puente. I have some Gato Barbieri, a couple of his songs that he made an instrumental sax version of, kind of a Latin flavor to him. Dave Brubeck. Um, those are the major ones. But I'm pretty sure there's some other digital copies I have. But those are the three that I have in my Chuck's playlist that is on shuffle. So I never know when they're gonna pop up, and when they do, I'm always pleasantly surprised and excited about hearing them. So that's it for Radio Infinity